Welcome to True Echo, where powerful stories of justice, resilience, and redemption come to life. Today's story is more than a confrontation. It's a seismic shift. A calm lunch spirals into a national reckoning when a racist cop pulls a gun on a man he thought was powerless, only to discover he was internal affairs. What followed ignited a revolution. This is a story of courage, accountability, and a single moment that changed everything. The Monarch table was the kind of place where power whispered rather than roared. Where money didn't shout to be heard, it simply expected things. The chandeliers didn't sparkle, they shimmered. Every polished beam, every folded napkin screamed legacy and restraint. And on this Thursday afternoon, Marcus Ree was here not as a symbol, not as a statement, but as a man craving silence. He had spent his morning wrestling through a stack of misconduct files. Pages of reports, contradictions, names, some familiar, some new, all soaked in the same rot, abuse, arrogance, unchecked power. Being the director of internal affairs wasn't about popularity, or safety, or even sanity. It was about truth. And truth, Marcus knew, was never gentle. He stepped into the restaurant, eyes scanning like a human radar. Reflexive. Habitual. Years of investigating the very system he served had carved instincts into his bones. In a charcoal suit tailored for practicality, not vanity, and a leather briefcase worn smooth at the edges, Marcus didn't look like a threat. He looked like a lawyer, or maybe a mid-level city bureaucrat, precisely the kind of man this city ignored. And that was exactly how he preferred it. "Table for one?" the hostess asked politely. She was young, maybe early 20s, composed beyond her years. "Yes." "Something quiet," he said, his voice low, smooth, and unwavering. "Of course, Mr. Ree," she smiled, already knowing his name. That meant the reservation had flagged something. Good. Subtle acknowledgement. No attention. Just service. The corner seat she offered was ideal, framed by tall windows that caught the gold of the afternoon sun and spilled it across the spotless tablecloth like honey. From here, Marcus could watch the room, and more importantly, not be watched. He sank into the plush chair, allowed a tired exhale to slip through his lips, and let the world soften around the edges. He ordered ribeye and red wine. Just 1 hour, he told himself. One precious hour not fighting the wind. Not plugging holes in a leaking dam. But peace, it seemed, was not on the menu. The glass door of the Monarch slammed open. Not opened, slammed, jarring against the brass stopper with a violent clang. Heads turned. Conversations clipped mid-sentence. Even the jazz piano paused a half-beat. In walked Officer Troy Maddox. He was broad. Red-faced. Swaggering in full uniform like he'd walked straight off a propaganda poster. His badge gleamed too much. His eyes gleamed too little. And from across the room, Marcus felt it, the tremor in the air. The instinctive pull in his gut. Something's off. The officer scanned the room with a predator's squint, until his eyes locked onto Marcus. And his jaw clenched. The boots thudded. Straight line. No detour. No decorum. "That's my seat," Maddox barked, his voice cracking across the room like a whip. Marcus didn't stand. Didn't flinch. He merely looked up, his expression unreadable. Calm. Controlled. Lethal in its stillness. "I was seated here by staff," Marcus replied. "I suggest you take that up with the hostess." But Maddox didn't want reason. He wanted a scene. "I sit here every week. This is my table," he growled. "You don't belong here." There it was. Not about the chair. Not about tradition. This was about power, or the illusion of it, being challenged by someone he'd already decided was beneath him. Marcus said nothing. He could feel the diners watching. He could feel the weight of silence beginning to settle, heavy and brittle. A tension that would snap if touched too hard. Maddox's knuckles whitened. He leaned in, jaw twitching, breath hot and foul. "Get up," he hissed. "Before I make you." Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. "I've already ordered lunch. I won't be moving." The entire room froze. Forks hovered midair. Conversation stopped mid-word. And then, as if compelled by some force inside him, Maddox's hand dropped to his belt. Marcus saw it before anyone else, the shift of muscle, the flick of a strap, the glint of a sidearm being drawn. A pistol cleared leather. Time stopped. The gasps came. Chairs scraped. A scream rang out near the bar. And in the span of a heartbeat, the Monarch table transformed from luxury to battlefield. Maddox held the gun chest level, aimed directly at Marcus. And Marcus didn't move. For a few long seconds, it was like the entire restaurant stopped breathing. The barrel of the pistol trembled slightly in Maddox's hand, his arms taut, his breathing heavy. All his rage, his fear, his fragile identity bound into that single act, pointing a loaded gun at a black man in a suit, over a chair. Across from him, Marcus Ree sat perfectly still. Not because he wasn't afraid, he was. He could feel the thunder of his own heart trying to crack through his ribs. But fear was a tool. And right now, it belonged to him. "Put the gun down, officer," Marcus said evenly, his voice carrying across the room like a courtroom gavel. "Get up." Maddox shouted, his voice cracking, too loud, too raw. The gun quivered. The hand behind it looked desperate now. His badge had turned into a threat, his uniform into a costume. And still, Marcus didn't budge. "Think carefully, Troy," he said slowly, his words slicing through the thick, stunned silence like a scalpel. "You pull that trigger, and your badge won't be the only thing you lose." Maddox's eyes twitched. Somewhere inside him, something faltered. "You think you're somebody?" Maddox sneered, spit flying. "You think this suit means anything?" Marcus didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Because as Maddox fumed and sputtered, a quiet movement stirred near the front door. A young patrol officer had stepped in, wide-eyed, unsure, but brave enough to speak. "Officer Maddox, stand down," the new voice said. "Right now." Officer Jordan Valdez, maybe 22 at most, his hand hovering over his own holster, was the first to challenge the scene out loud. Maddox didn't look at him. "This doesn't concern you, rookie," he barked. Valdez took one step closer. "You're pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed civilian in a public place. This is over." Then, a sound. Not from the officers. Not from the diners. From somewhere in the ceiling, a crackle of static, and then, a voice. It didn't yell. It didn't need to. "This is Chief Barbara Gaines. Officer Maddox, lower your weapon immediately." Maddox went pale. The voice of his chief, sharp, cold, and unmistakable, echoed through the restaurant speakers. Marcus had tapped his phone once under the table, triggering a direct relay through the internal IA system. That one button had activated a silent broadcast, a protocol only a few ever knew existed. "I have officers en route to your location," Chief Gaines continued, her voice precise and deadly. "You are under direct order to disarm and surrender. If you do not comply, you will be treated as an active threat." You could hear a pin drop. The word, threat, echoed like a bullet. Maddox's gun trembled violently. His jaw clenched. And then, with a choked, half-animal groan, he slowly lowered the weapon and placed it on the table. The pistol hit the glass with a sharp metallic clink. Valdez moved fast, booting the weapon away, stepping in with a clean, swift click of cuffs. The room exhaled. Slowly, hesitantly. Glasses tinkled. Someone near the back began crying. And Marcus, only now, allowed his hands to leave the table. He took a long, steady breath. But it wasn't over. The monarch's glass double doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't chaos that followed, it was command. Chief Barbara Gaines marched inside like a general entering a battlefield. Flanked by 2 senior officers, she moved with terrifying precision, polished boots hammering the marble floor with the finality of Judgment Day. Her eyes swept the scene, the trembling diners, the fallen pistol, the cuffed officer whose face had drained of every trace of color. Then her gaze landed on Marcus. She gave a nod, just enough to show she recognized the situation. Then her eyes turned to Maddox, and hardened into stone. "Troy Maddox," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a verdict. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Maddox's voice cracked as he tried to speak. "Chief, he provoked me. He." "Shut your mouth." The slap of her voice could have shattered glass. The entire room flinched. Even the diners. Even the officers. She stepped closer. Not fast. Not emotional. Just devastating. "You pulled a gun," she said, voice low, on an unarmed man in a restaurant, over a chair. Maddox opened his mouth again. "A mistake. You have disgraced your badge," Gaines roared, louder now. "You have endangered every single officer in this city. And worst of all, you did it thinking nobody would hold you accountable." She turned sharply. "Strip him." One senior officer yanked the badge from Maddox's chest. Another removed his duty belt and weapon. It was fast, clean, brutal. Like watching armor being ripped from a fallen knight. Maddox didn't look angry anymore. He looked hollow. "Chief, please," he begged, barely audible now. Not another word," she snapped. "You're done." The officers moved to escort him out. But before they could, Maddox twisted his head toward Marcus, eyes bloodshot, face tight with hatred and something else, fear. "You did this," he hissed. "You think this ends with me?" Marcus didn't blink. "It doesn't end with you," he said. "It starts with you." The officers dragged Maddox away. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them. The room stood still again. Then slowly, murmurs. Voices. Cameras clicking. The world, once again, in motion. Chief Gaines rubbed her temple. "This is going to explode." Marcus finally stood. Adjusted his jacket. Straightened his spine. "Yes," he said. "But it needed to." She nodded once. "We'll need a statement. We'll need everything." Marcus gave a grim smile. "You'll have it." Outside, the sirens had faded. But inside, history had been written in silence, and steel. By the time Marcus Ree stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, the city had already started to change. Word traveled fast in a place wired for outrage. And what had happened inside the monarch table, a high-ranking officer pulling a gun on an unarmed black man over a seat, only to be disarmed and arrested by his own department, wasn't just a story. It was a wildfire. As Marcus emerged from the restaurant's marble steps, a crowd had already started to gather across the street. Some had their phones up, recording. Others simply watched, wide-eyed, mouths parted. He adjusted his cufflinks, gave a silent nod to Officer Valdez, who now stood post by the entrance, still shaken but steadier than before, and moved toward the waiting black city vehicle that had quietly pulled to the curb. Inside, his assistant sat stunned, phone buzzing non-stop in her lap. "You're trending," she whispered as he climbed in. "Wonderful," Marcus muttered dryly. The next morning, it was everywhere. Headlines. Officer pulls gun on city official over table dispute. Restaurant standoff caught on camera, abuse of power at the Monarch. Who is Marcus Ree? And why that cop should have known better. Cable news played the footage again and again, the trembling gun, the stillness of Marcus, the thunderous command of Chief Gaines booming over the speakers. Analysts debated it, social media dissected it, talk radio exploded. One network played a split screen, on one side, Maddox snarling and sweating with a pistol aimed point blank. On the other, Marcus Ree, unmoved, composed, eyes locked on the man threatening his life. Within 48 hours, public pressure hit a boiling point. Outside the downtown precinct, protesters swarmed. Banners stretched across barricades. Accountability now. Justice is a seat at every table. No more tyrants with badges. The chants were relentless. Protect, don't threaten. Strip the badge, fix the shield. Do your job, not your ego. Inside a corner office at City Hall, Marcus stood by a window, arms folded. The street below seethed with movement. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of people demanding justice. And for once, their voices weren't being ignored. Behind him, Chief Gaines paced like a lion in a cage, her silver hair pulled into a tight twist, her boots clicking with every furious step. In her hand, a thick folder bulged with paper, complaints, reports, all centered around one name. Troy Maddox. 7 complaints, she snapped. Excessive force, verbal abuse, intimidation of suspects, racial slurs, you name it. All buried? Marcus asked without turning. Reassigned. Redacted. Investigated internally, you know the game. Marcus finally turned from the window. His face was steel. Not anymore. Gaines stared at him for a long moment. This city's not going to like what comes next. You know that. They never do, Marcus said. But they'll respect it. She dropped the folder onto a nearby table with a loud, accusatory thump. You lit a goddamn match under a powder keg. No, Marcus replied, stepping forward. Maddox lit it. I just refused to pretend I didn't smell the smoke. For the first time, Chief Gaines allowed a flicker of a smile to tug at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd waited too long to say finally. You're not going to be popular after this, she said. They'll come for you. Marcus didn't blink. I wasn't put here to be popular, he said. I was put here to fix what's broken. That was the moment everything shifted. In the following days, Marcus and Chief Gaines stood side by side at a press conference watched by over 4 million people. Chief Gaines stood behind the podium, flanked by city officials and community leaders, her voice hard and clear. As of today, she announced, body cameras are mandatory on every officer in this department. No exceptions. Internal Affairs will have access to footage within 24 hours of any use of force incident. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Effective immediately, she continued, a civilian oversight board will be created with full investigative powers, including subpoena authority. Then she turned to Marcus, who stepped forward without notes, without hesitation. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. I did not sit still in that restaurant because I was weak, he said. I sat still because I refused to be moved by fear. That moment wasn't about a chair. It was about a system. A system that protects its worst while punishing its best. He paused. I'm here to say that system ends now. The applause didn't erupt all at once. It built like a wave. Quiet. Then thunderous. Then deafening. Not everyone clapped. Some officials looked away. Some clenched their jaws. Some whispered to each other, already plotting their resistance. But Marcus didn't care. Because for once, maybe for the first time in years, the crowd was louder than the bureaucracy. Later that night, in the precinct halls, things cracked. Some officers glared at Marcus when he passed, their faces tight, their eyes dark with resentment. But others nodded. Quiet nods. Hesitant, but real. One even muttered, about time. Change never came gently. It came like a storm. And storms made everyone uncomfortable. By the end of the week, 4 other officers had been suspended. Old complaints were reopened. The civilian board was approved by a 9-2 city vote. The police union grumbled, threatened lawsuits, held press conferences of their own. But the public wasn't backing down. Because the video wasn't going away. Late one evening, as Marcus was packing up files after another brutal round of meetings, his office door creaked open. It was Officer Jordan Valdez, the rookie who had spoken up at the restaurant. He stepped inside, hat in his hands, back straight. "Sir," he said softly. "Just wanted to say thank you. What you did, standing up. It mattered." Marcus looked at the young man for a long moment. Saw in him the future that could still be saved. "It's not over," Marcus said. Valdez nodded. "Good. I don't want it to be." As he left, Marcus turned back to his office window. The city glowed beyond the glass, neon lights flickering in the haze, buildings like jagged promises rising against the sky. The fire Troy Maddox started hadn't burned Marcus down. It had forged him into something stronger. And the real battle was only just beginning. The video didn't just make headlines. It carved itself into the public conscience. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere, trending across platforms, dissected by journalists, memed by teenagers, and reposted by civil rights advocates nationwide. A viral clip that began with an entitled officer demanding a seat had become something far more damning, a parable of unchecked power, caught in the act. The image burned into everyone's mind was clear. A shaking gun, a calm man, and a system suddenly exposed under a microscope. By the end of the week, even national outlets had picked up the story. The footage ran on primetime television. Experts debated it. Former officers condemned it. And through it all, the name Marcus Ree, once barely known outside the law enforcement oversight community, had become synonymous with one word. Integrity. But integrity didn't mean safety. Inside City Hall, Marcus felt the shift. Meetings with the mayor grew tense. Allies grew quiet. Certain council members suddenly became unavailable. Threats came, not overt, but veiled. Anonymous calls. Strange emails. His assistant reported 2 men casing his home, they vanished before police could arrive. But Marcus didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time someone wanted him silent. It just might be the first time they realized he wouldn't be. Then came the trial. 3 months after the Monarch Table incident, the state pressed formal charges against Troy Maddox. He was arrested again, this time without ceremony, and marched into a courtroom beneath a gauntlet of cameras, booze, and signs that read, "This badge doesn't shield hate. Disarm corruption." Inside, the air was stifling. Every bench packed. Every row filled with press, citizens, activists. Marcus sat in the front, silent, expression carved from stone. He wore the same charcoal suit he'd worn that day, not for drama, but for remembrance. The prosecution was merciless. They played the video on a courtroom monitor. Again. And again. Every time, the jury flinched, especially when Maddox's pistol wavered, or when he snarled at Marcus across the table. One witness, an elderly woman who had been dining near the bar, broke down as she recalled ducking under her table. "I thought I was going to die over a damn chair," she wept. Maddox's attorney tried every angle. A lapse in judgment. Provocation. Emotional distress. But the facts didn't bend. And the tape didn't lie. Marcus was called to the stand. He took his oath without pause, hands steady. "Did you fear for your life?" the prosecutor asked. "I knew I could die in that moment," Marcus said. "But I also knew I couldn't move. Because if I did, the next man like Maddox would do it again, to someone who didn't have the power I did. I stayed seated because someone had to." The courtroom fell into a hush. Even the judge sat forward. In closing arguments, the prosecutor's voice rang like steel. "This badge," he said, holding up a replica of Maddox's police insignia, "is not a license to terrify. It is a promise to protect. When a man violates that promise so egregiously, in public, with witnesses, and with intent, he does not deserve a uniform. He deserves justice." The jury took 3 hours. Guilty. Assault with a deadly weapon. Abuse of authority. Reckless endangerment. No plea deal. No suspended sentence. 4 years in state prison. Lifetime ban from law enforcement. When the verdict was read, Maddox slumped forward, forehead hitting the table. The bailiff snapped the cuffs on, almost gentle now, as if even he felt the finality of it. As Maddox was led out, he turned once toward Marcus, and this time, there was no venom in his eyes. Just defeat. Just understanding. It was over. But only for him. 1 year later, the city was different. Not perfect. Not even close. But different. Body cams had become standard. The Civilian Oversight Board, once a toothless formality, now wielded real power. 3 officers had been removed under its new authority. 2 more resigned before hearings could be held. And Marcus Ree? He became a symbol. Not a hero. He didn't want that. But a standard. A measuring stick by which accountability would be judged. Some within the department hated him for it. Others respected him quietly. Some even thanked him in passing, small nods in hallways, a mumbled, "You were right," over coffee. It was slow, like rust cracking off iron. But it was real. He still received threats. Letters. DMs full of bile. 1 envelope with no return address, only a burned-out badge inside. He kept it in his drawer, not out of fear, but as a reminder. Progress cost something. One morning in spring, Marcus returned to the Monarch table. The same corner seat. The same view of the city. It looked different now, not softer, but sharper. A place still worth fighting for. He ordered a coffee and leaned back, letting the sun catch the edge of his briefcase. His reflection in the window met his eyes, calm, lined, and unyielding. A man who didn't blink. A man who didn't move. And across the city, in homes and stations and courtrooms, others remembered that too. Because the fire Maddox lit didn't just burn. It illuminated everything. Change, Marcus learned, was like pulling teeth from concrete. The trial had ended, the reforms were in motion, and the city's eyes had turned, if only briefly, toward accountability. But as the weeks bled into months, the momentum began to stall. The news cycle moved on. Protests thinned. The headlines stopped screaming. And the old guard? They started to push back. Behind closed doors, officers complained of being watched too closely. Some filed paperwork demanding the Civilian Oversight Board be dissolved. Union lawyers whispered lawsuits into microphones outside the courthouse, calling the reforms a violation of officer trust. Marcus expected it. He prepared for it. But what he didn't expect was the leak. It came quietly at first, a low murmur from a journalist friend who met him at a quiet cafe off Elm Street. "They're coming for you," she said, eyes sharp beneath wire-rimmed glasses. "Who?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "The ones whose careers you've iced. Old names. Some new ones. A few city officials. Word is, they're building a narrative." "What kind of narrative?" She hesitated. "Then, that you overstepped. That you're creating a hostile environment. One report claims you've intimidated officers during internal reviews. Another accuses you of falsifying misconduct stats to justify firings." Marcus blinked. "That's fiction." She nodded grimly. "That's politics." It wasn't long before the stories began to surface, op-eds, vague claims, anonymous sources. Is Marcus Ree too powerful? IA director faces accusations of retaliation. Headlines designed not to convict but to erode. Gaines called him into her office. They're baiting you, she said. They want you to lash out. Make a mistake. Give them something real to hang you with. I won't, Marcus said. No, she agreed. But it doesn't matter. They've decided you're dangerous, not because you're wrong. But because you're right, and they can't stop you. He nodded once. Let them try. But even Marcus couldn't deny what came next. Late one evening, he returned to his apartment to find his front door ajar. He drew his sidearm, moved slow, cleared the space with every instinct honed over decades. No intruder. Nothing stolen. But on his kitchen table, a single bullet sat upright. Just one. Beside it, a typed note. This isn't over. Police reports were filed. Security reviewed. But the message was clear, someone wanted him to feel watched. Vulnerable. Marcus didn't flinch publicly. But inside? A different storm began to churn. Not fear, not yet. But fatigue. Deep and bitter. The kind that eats at conviction. Then came the council meeting. A surprise proposal was introduced by Councilman David Trent, one of the few officials who had vocally opposed the IA reforms from the start. Motion to review and possibly dissolve the current Civilian Oversight Board, Trent read aloud, in the interest of departmental cohesion and officer morale. Marcus stood to object. But the mayor didn't call on him. He ignored Marcus's raised hand, looking instead at the crowd of cameras and stiff suits as if trying to pretend the man who had forced the system to wake up wasn't in the room at all. The vote didn't pass, not that day. But it came too close. 4-5. Just one vote away. Afterward, Marcus sat in his office, the lights dimmed, the city dark beyond the windows. He stared at the folder of reforms he had once carried like a weapon. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the slow ache of doubt. Was the system too big? Too old? Was it even possible to fix something this broken without breaking yourself? A knock broke his silence. It was Officer Valdez. He entered, hat in hand, again. But this time, he didn't seem nervous. He looked determined. Sir, he said. I want to show you something. Marcus raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. Valdez opened his phone. Pulled up a video. It was grainy, clearly filmed from a dashcam. But the sound was clear. A senior officer, one of Maddox's old patrol partners, was caught berating a young black teenager during a traffic stop. Threatening. Intimidating. The teen was crying. Hands up. Pleading. And the officer? We don't take orders from people like you. You shut up and stay down. Marcus stared at the footage. His jaw clenched. Where did you get this? He asked. Anonymous drop, Valdez said. No tags. No identifiers. Just a flash drive in my locker this morning. Someone wants this scene, but they're scared. Marcus looked up. And in that moment, something shifted back into place. Resolve. Purpose. Steel. Then we make it seen, Marcus said. We don't flinch. We don't stop. If they want war, we give them truth. Valdez smiled. And for the first time since the Monarch incident, Marcus smiled too. It wasn't warm. It was sharpened, forged from everything he'd endured. They tried to destroy him with whispers and fear. But Marcus had something louder. Proof. And he was done being polite. It took less than 12 hours for the video officer Valdez had uncovered to make its way into the bloodstream of the city. Marcus didn't leak it to the press. He didn't have to. He simply sent it to the Civilian Oversight Board with one line in the email subject. Exhibit A, still think we're done. From there, it spread like a virus. The footage of a seasoned officer verbally assaulting a frightened teenager, echoing almost word for word the venom Maddox had once spat, ignited the fire all over again. This wasn't ancient history. This wasn't an anomaly. This was now. By morning, it was already on the morning news. By noon, it was national. And that afternoon, Marcus Ree stood behind a podium once more, cameras flashing, microphones jammed forward like bayonets. He didn't give them a speech. He gave them a war plan. This department does not belong to its worst, Marcus said calmly, eyes scanning the rows of reporters. It belongs to its best. And the best do not fear oversight. They welcome it. He held up a printed copy of Councilman Trent's failed resolution to dissolve the civilian board. And if anyone in city government believes that hiding evidence or silencing whistleblowers is going to help departmental morale, then perhaps they're part of the problem. Boom. The press erupted. Councilman Trent's office went dark. He cancelled 2 public appearances and released a brief, fumbled statement the next day. I was unaware of the recent video at the time of my resolution. But it was too late. The ground had shifted again, and this time, it cracked wide open. Because Valdez's flash drive hadn't just contained one file. There were 7. 7 unreported incidents. All involving officers connected to Maddox's circle, men who had survived years in the force through silence, loyalty, and intimidation. It was a house of cards. And Marcus now held the wind. Chief Gaines summoned a task force within 48 hours. Internal affairs, community liaisons, independent prosecutors. Their goal, reopen every complaint filed in the past 5 years that had been dismissed or inconclusive. Marcus knew what they'd find. Because he'd already seen it, in the smudged handwriting of scared citizens, in the hastily closed files of rookie investigators who'd clearly been warned off, in the smirks of officers who believed the blue wall was bulletproof. But it wasn't. Not anymore. The next 2 weeks were a blur. 4 officers suspended. 2 quietly resigned. 1 detective tried to delete his old incident logs, his hard drive was recovered. Another was caught pressuring a subordinate into silence. The press called it the cleansing. City officials called it overreach. Marcus didn't care what they called it. It was justice. Then, in the middle of this chaos, a letter arrived. Unmarked envelope. No stamp. Left on Marcus's desk sometime between 9 a.m. and noon. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Short. You made your point. Now walk away. Or your family learns how it feels. He stared at it for a long time. Then he called Chief Gaines. Within the hour, his family was relocated under protection. His address scrubbed from public databases. His phone encrypted. But that wasn't the end of it. He called a press conference the next morning. Held up the letter on live television. I am not afraid, Marcus said. And I will not stop. If this is how low corruption must go to preserve itself, then I welcome the darkness. Because I brought a light. It was the line that made the headlines. It was the moment that turned him from a civil servant, into a symbol. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. And yet, quietly, in police stations and government offices across the state, others began to step forward. Anonymous emails. Tip lines. Flash drives slipped under doors. Whistleblowers came out of hiding. Not all were dramatic. Some were just ordinary men and women, tired of watching their departments rot from the inside. Marcus met with every single one. He listened. He recorded. He built cases. What had started as a confrontation over a table had become something else entirely. A reckoning. The mayor, who had once treated Marcus like a political inconvenience, now called him into meetings as a necessity. The civilian board's budget was doubled. The union tried to sue. They lost in court. The public? They marched again. Not in protest, but in support. Hundreds of citizens stood outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Hold the line, Marcus. Truth over tradition." He Saturday. We stood. Marcus didn't attend the march. He didn't need to. He was already at work, reviewing a new set of files handed to him by an anonymous source in a brown envelope. When Officer Valdez stopped by that evening, dropping off new footage from a city intersection, he paused in the doorway. "You all right, sir?" he asked. Marcus looked up, bags under his eyes, collar loosened, the remnants of another sleepless day hanging around him like armor. "I'm tired," he admitted. "But I'm not done." Valdez smiled. "Good. Because we're not either." Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. The city was still broken. Still violent. Still slow to change. But for the first time, it was moving in the right direction. And he wasn't pushing alone anymore. He had a team. He had a movement. And soon, he'd have the whole damn system. 1 year. That's how long it had been since Troy Maddox slammed through the doors of the Monarch table, drunk on power, and pointed a gun at the wrong man. 12 months to the day. And the city was not the same. The department looked different. Officers now wore body cams as naturally as their badges. The oversight board was no longer a formality, it was feared. Trusted. Investigations weren't buried. They were televised. Departmental training had been restructured. A culture of silence had begun to splinter. The numbers told their own story. Use of force incidents had dropped by 36%. Civilian complaints down by 41%. Internal investigations up by 300%. Because people finally believed someone was listening. Because Marcus Ree had refused to move. But this story wasn't about numbers. It was about a moment. And it was about what happened when the city's most broken corner was forced to stare into a mirror, and change. On the anniversary, Marcus returned to the Monarch table. Same table. Same chair. This time, the hostess didn't ask if he had a reservation. She simply nodded, smiled, and led him to the corner window. There was no tension in the air now. No threat hiding behind polite conversation. Just the hum of jazz, the clinking of glass, and the familiar weight of sunlight on white linen. He ordered black coffee. No fanfare. No press. Just reflection. Across the restaurant, someone raised their glass in silent recognition. He nodded once. He never craved the spotlight. He'd lived most of his career behind closed doors, buried in reports and silence. He hadn't wanted to be a symbol. He'd wanted peace. But the world didn't give it to him. It gave him Maddox. And so, he had done what was necessary. His phone buzzed on the table. One new voicemail. He tapped it on speaker, expecting a mundane update from IA. But the voice that came through was sharp. Female. Older. Controlled. "Mr. Ree, this is Warden Price from State Penitentiary. You asked to be notified if inmate Troy Maddox filed any legal motions from inside." Marcus straightened slightly. "He has. He's requested an early parole hearing, on the basis of rehabilitation and emotional growth. The board meets in 30 days. We thought you should be aware." Marcus ended the call. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he slowly exhaled and leaned back in his chair. Of course. It wasn't over. Not really. A man like Maddox didn't vanish. He waited. Watched. Planned. Still, Marcus wasn't afraid. But he wasn't naive either. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the folder he'd started that morning, labeled Maddox Appeal, Anticipated Arguments and Strategic Response. Because even if Maddox was fading, his mindset was not. There would always be another. Another abuser. Another opportunist. Another coward wearing courage like a costume. That was the truth Marcus had come to live with. The job was never done. The system never fully healed. But it could be treated. It could be defended. One case at a time. One policy at a time. One refusal to back down, at a time. 30 days later, Marcus sat in a plain stateroom, across from a panel of 3 parole board members. Behind thick glass, shackled and in orange, sat Troy Maddox. Older. Paler. Thinner. But still Maddox. His eyes flicked to Marcus when he entered. No words passed between them. The board asked him questions. Predictable ones. Have you taken responsibility for your actions? What have you done to ensure this behavior will not continue? Do you believe you were treated fairly by the justice system? Maddox answered all of them. Politely. Carefully. With practiced restraint. He had learned to mimic remorse. But Marcus could see it. The contempt behind the calm. When the board turned to him, Marcus didn't bring fire. He brought precision. I'm not here to relive what happened, he said. You've all seen the video. You know the facts. I'm here to ask one question: if Maddox had succeeded that day, what message would we be living with now? He let the silence sit. Would we have a civilian oversight board? Would other officers have spoken up? Would citizens still believe their city cared about justice? He turned slightly, meeting Maddox's eyes for the first time. You didn't just threaten me, Marcus said. You threatened a system. A city. A generation of officers who watched you act without consequence. He looked back to the board. Letting him out early doesn't save time. It erases accountability. And I promise you, people are still watching. He sat. The board deliberated for less than 10 minutes. Parole denied. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood, nodded once, and walked out. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding the city, actions still had weight. Words still had meaning. Justice was not a viral moment. It was a sustained fight. Months passed. Then a year. And still, Marcus worked. He didn't become a politician. He didn't write a book. He didn't cash in. He stayed at internal affairs. Not because it was easy, but because it was his post. His line in the sand. And every day that he held it, more people stood with him. More officers like Valdez. More citizens who stopped staying silent. More judges who stopped defaulting to immunity. More truth. On the second anniversary of the Monarch Table incident, Marcus received a letter in a neat white envelope. No stamp. Just a city seal. Inside was a single sentence. You made us believe again. Thank you. It wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. Because Marcus had already won. Not in court. Not on paper. But in the heart of the city. He stood at the window of his office that afternoon, watching the sun slip behind the skyline, casting the buildings in gold. And he realized, justice wasn't a moment. It was a seat. You claimed it. You held it. And when someone tried to take it from you, you didn't move. Sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance is refusing to give ground. Marcus Ree didn't need to raise his voice or throw a punch. He just stayed seated, and that single act unraveled a lie the city had lived with for too long. As Marcus said, the job's never done. But it can be defended. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that justice still matters, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever stood your ground when no one else would? This is True Echo, where real courage echoes louder than hate.